Hello, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, President and CEO of TRANSLEADERSHIP Incorporated and the host of the Voice of Leadership podcast. Today is day 7, the final lesson in our series, Kingship Training, and today's topic is Time to Move, and we are studying different lessons from King David's life. And our study today comes from 1 Samuel, the 30th chapter. And while David was out with the Philistines, which were an enemy nation, and he was living in Philistine territory at this time, and the Philistines were about to go to war against Israel, they mistakenly thought at the time that David was on their side because he had kind of pretended and acted like he was on their side for a while and had been living among them for a period of time. However, when they went to go to battle, their people weren't very comfortable with David being included in the mix, afraid that perhaps he would end up turning on them and fighting on Israel's side. So David and his men were turned back, and they went back to their Philistine home in Ziklag. When they got there, they discovered that another enemy nation, the Amalekites, had come in. They had stolen all the wives, the women, the children, all of their possessions and carried them away, and they had burned the city with fire. David's men were distraught, and David was distraught. And his men were so upset that they actually started blaming David, and they really wanted to stone him. They wanted to kill him behind all of these things that happened. So we're going to see how David handles the situation, which is really a compilation of everything we've been learning and studying from all the other days of lessons. First of all, in verse 6 of that chapter, 1 Samuel 30, David strengthened himself in the Lord. That was one of the first things he did when faced with this very difficult situation. Verse 7 also tells us that he inquired of the Lord through Abiathar the priest. He had to figure out what should he do. And God gave him the message, yes, go after the Amalekites and fight against them, and you will be successful. And so what we discover and what we find out is that when he went over to the Amalekite area, they recovered not some of what was taken, they recovered it all. All the wives, all the children, all the possessions, plus they brought back the spoils of the enemy, and they killed the majority of their enemies as well. So David was successful in that battle. And he had some men who were too tired to go into this battle with them because of what they had been doing before in previous battles. He left those men behind to guard the supplies. This started David now another piece of caring for people. He returned, of course, all the possessions and what belonged to each person that had been stolen, and the spoils from the enemies he gave to the warriors who went over with him. But even the men who kept the supplies, he cared for them and gave them some of the spoils, and thus started a new tradition which he carried on in his kingship. Even if you were guarding the supplies and not directly in battle, you still had a share of the spoils. He also sent some of those spoils to his friends in Judah, because now remember, all of his men, they had been wandering around in the wilderness for a long time. Many people had helped them. Many people had been kind to them, and he remembered them and sent gifts to them as well. So this is David now caring for the people. Now, it turns out in chapter 31 that Saul is out in a battle against the Philistines, and he and his sons, including David's best friend Jonathan, they are all killed. So now King Saul is dead, and this brings us to the book of 2 Samuel and the second chapter. And so David is now trying to figure out what to do. He goes back to Ziklag. He's there in Ziklag that's been burned by fire. He's only been there a couple of days. And I want you to notice, sometimes when your Ziklag home gets burned down by fire, it's because it's time to move. So when David inquired of the Lord in 2 Samuel, the second chapter, verse 1, God told him to move back to Judah to the town of Hebron. So that's where he ended up going. So when your Ziklag burns down, God often has another place for you. So I have some reflection questions that I want you to think about as we just sort of wrap up this whole series of lessons. And that is, first of all, to what royal purpose are you called? And how is this season in your life and business warrior training for you? Whether you're actually fighting a battle or you're actually resting in the stronghold. And what is God saying to you in this season? And do you hear his voice above all others? Because remember, people will be saying things to you. You should do this, you should do that. And it may not line up with what God really wants you to do. And what are you doing? And what are you learning in this season about caring for your people? And how is your character being developed in terms of operating in integrity? Will you operate in integrity no matter what's going on? And has your Ziklag been burned with fire? Is it time to move to a new place? And if so, what is that place? Where is it that God may be leading you? So as you meditate and think about those questions, remember, you still have access to a complimentary advisory session with me to really talk about what those next steps are for you. So if you are an executive business leader in a medium-sized or larger business, you can write to me at Dr. Karen, Dr. Karen, at transleadership.com. And together we can figure out what's next for you. And I want to leave you with some verses of encouragement today. And the first one comes from Romans 8, and it is the 28th verse. And it says, "And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose." And I want you to notice in that verse, it doesn't say that all things are good. However, it does say that all things work together for good to those who love God. And then for our concluding verse in this series, I would like for us to read Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7. "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." I hope that you have enjoyed this series that we've been doing for the 7 days. And if you didn't hear all the episodes, please go back and hear all 7 days of the Kingship training series, Divine Wisdom for Times Such as These. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to hearing from you and requesting your advisory session. Thank you.